Welcome to the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm your host, Robin L. Owens, PhD, and this is where we dive in each week to give advice, tools, and tips for high-achieving, purpose-minded women who've written nonfiction books and want to amplify their message beyond the book. I'm a college professor, and when I'm not doing that, I am speaking, coaching, mentoring, and teaching high-achieving women who have written books how to use their books to make a bigger difference, have more impact, and purpose. Okay, let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and taking time to listen into the podcast. Really appreciate you. And I'm really excited about today's conversation because today I'm talking with Susanne Mariga. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Susanne. She's a certified public accountant, a certified tax coach, and a chartered global management accountant. And the thing I'm most interested in today, she's the author of the book, Profit First for Minority Business Enterprises, which is a #1 new release bestseller. Congratulations on that. And her company, Mariga CPA, was recognized as a Goldman Sachs 10,000 small business. And she's received so many other awards. I can't wait to get into this conversation. But the last thing I'll say in this introduction is Suzanne's mission is to help eradicate entrepreneurial poverty and change family legacies. Welcome, Susanne Mariga.
Well, Dr. Robin, I'm excited to be here today and talk with you and your listeners.
I'm so glad you're here. Let's jump in. All right. So now I just did a little bit of your bio, kind of official. Why don't you just tell us in your own words about who you are and then about your work?
Sure. So background wise, I am a tax accountant, CPA tax accountant. So if you guys want to go ahead and take that opportunity on, this is your best time to do that. And, I started my career working for my dad. He hired me when I was 14 years old to be his bookkeeper for his CPA firm. And, naturally, I found that very easy in school. Ended up going to the top firm in the country, Arthur Andersen in Chicago, graduating, ended up then working for KPMG. And 10 years ago, or actually, no, it's actually 15 years ago, I started my own business as a CPA. And we specialize in working with 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs. We help them with being as their strategist, as our fractional CFO. I also help them with high net worth tax strategies. And I'm also an author. I wrote a book, part of the Profit First family, which we can talk about later on in this episode. But I wrote a book called Profit First for Minority Business Enterprises, which I'm extremely excited about.
That's fascinating. Now, when you started at 14 years old, did you like it? Did you think you were going to like it? Or are you just going to try this bookkeeping thing? Or how was that?
I think my dad was just trying to keep me away from the boys. It's an opportunity to bring me into his office. I get to learn how to answer the phone and stay busy, right? Yeah. Was his goal. But it was also an amazing tax deduction too, because, when you hire your child and depending on how you're operating your company as a sole proprietorship or an LLC that's a single member LLC, if your child's making less than a standard deduction, that's tax-free income to that child. It's a write-off to you. It's tax-free income to the child. And so, he had a double vote. It was babysitting at the same time, a tax strategy.
But it sounds like you took to it though.
I did. It came very natural. I think it was being that, if anybody's familiar with DISC profiling, that high C concentration data person, I think that was just naturally there for me. And so just, that ability to concentrate was just there. And I loved hanging out with my dad. He would always take me to lunch during the lunchtime during the workday. And I just loved it.
Yeah, that's wonderful too, that you had that opportunity to share your time together. So that's wonderful. All right. So now you told us a little bit about the work you do, and I mentioned the book. So let's just get right to it because I can't wait, right? I'm just so eager. All right. So tell us again the title, I mentioned it, and then start with the premise of the book, and then we'll get into more.
So the book is called Profit First for Minority Business Enterprises, and it's part of the Profit First family with Mike Michalowicz. So it was written by myself and also in collaboration with Mike Michalowicz. And it's a little bit different than a traditional Profit First because I think as people of color, we have a different background. My background was I was the first one to graduate from college in my family on my mother's side, and this is a family of sharecropping. If you go back another generation, slavery. And I remember when I graduated from Ohio State, you would have thought, Dr. Robin, that I graduated from Yale. Like literally, all my aunts came down from Philadelphia, and if you could imagine this hug of these really large behind women, just giving me a hug. And it was significant to our family because it meant a change in legacy. It meant meaning that we weren't not necessarily going to be the cleaners anymore in our family, right? The people that clean homes for white people, right? It meant that we were going to be establishing our new way, whatever that meant. That excitement of going to college meant that life was going to be different. And so they were extremely excited about that. And it was interesting because my first job, which was at Anderson in the Chicago office, I remember flying to Chicago from Columbus, Ohio. And I remember asking my coworkers, I was like, where should I live? And my coworkers, they met best. A lot of us that are high achieving women, we've been in these rooms where nobody else looks like us. And my coworker just honestly said, live on Lincoln Park, live in Lakeview, but whatever you do, stay away from the south side of Chicago. And I was like, okay, well, I want to be safe. I'll get this apartment, which was a beautiful apartment. You couldn't tell where the sky began and the lake ended. It was just blue when you looked out of the window. And I'll tell you, as soon as you walk out into the street, like everybody looks like they're driving a Jetta and they look like Barbie and Ken. And I remember taking this bus one day. I was just bored. Whenever you move to a new city and you don't know anybody, you're just bored. And I remember taking this bus and I said, I'm just going to ride the bus to where the bus don't go no more. And so I took this bus and it dropped me off right at the very, not really, right around Roosevelt, Michigan, like that end, if anybody's familiar with Chicago. And I remember taking another bus, just randomly taking a bus. And what I noticed was on this trip, like when you're on the north side, beautiful stores, boutiques, then you have your major department stores. But when I switched buses, the world changed. It got boarded up windows. You started seeing those shopping carts that were being pushed around. The grocery stores looked like there was definitely a food desert there. And I said, wait a minute, why does the world change at Roosevelt in Michigan? Why does the world need to change? And what occurred to me was the reason why the world changed was because there weren't job opportunities on the South Side. There wasn't property tax opportunities. And as a result, there weren't funding opportunities. And so people got less benefits living on the South Side. And so I thought to myself, how do you change that? And how do you change that? You change that through entrepreneurship. When Dr. Robin hires me, right now, my daughter gets to see that, oh, I can actually have a DR in front of my name. You know what I mean? Or I can do something different with my life, or I can get experience at 14 because working for my neighbor, right? And so that's the reason why I wrote this book, Profit First for Minority Business Enterprises, because I wanted to eradicate entrepreneur poverty in every part of the country, not just the North Side, but also the South Side, and create that equity of opportunity and financial equity.
Yeah, that's a powerful story. And good for you just getting out there and getting on the bus, because that alone was like a bit of an adventure. I've moved a few times across different states, and so I know how it is when you're in a new place. All right. So now, and I want to say, I love the story about your family celebrating you of graduating and that kind of stuff. And I often tell the story about how my mother was the valedictorian of her high school class, and she had a dream of going to college and being a teacher. But because there were so many siblings, they couldn't afford to send them all to college. So they sent the boys because they felt like they would get married and have to take care of family, and the women will get married to men, and then they would, live basically off of their husband's salary. So she didn't get a chance to go to college, and she was heartbroken by that. And she ended up working in a factory for 35 years and hated it for 35 years. So to see that even in high school, I can see the impact that had on her, which is often the fuel for my drive of always seeking meaning and purpose in work. So when you talked about the celebration around education, I was like, I can understand that. I can understand that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely. And what a shame to have that bottled up
Yeah.
opportunity there. I mean, she must have never been able to really relate to those around her because obviously she was operating at a whole different IQ level.
Yeah. And she wanted to express herself differently than she could there. Yeah. Okay. All right. So now you mentioned your book about being a part of the Profit First family, and I know what you're referencing, but there might be some people who are not familiar. So let's just start there. Say what you meant when you talked about the Profit First family.
So profit first is a different concept. It's a cash management concept. And I know a lot of you guys are authors and authorship in many ways is entrepreneurship, right? I wish I realized that when I first wrote my book. And and what the concept is as business owners, we need to pay our profit first, literally pay our profit first. Too many businesses, they prioritize, I'm going to call it the traditional accounting equation. Revenue minus expenses equals profit, right? That's what we're taught in school. That's what I was tested on. That's what my whole CPA is based upon. That's generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP. And the problem with that equation is that when you focus on revenue, you focus on sales, right? Sell more books, right? Sell more books, pay more advertising, and then be responsible, right? Pay your bills, don't accumulate debt. Then we're taught that naturally profit, right, is a byproduct of doing those two things. And the reality is it isn't. It's literally an afterthought. And that's the reason why at the end of the day, 70% of small businesses are closing in 5 years because they're not focusing on the profit. And so what Profit First says is, instead of paying our expenses first, instead of prioritizing paying expenses, we're going to pay our profit first. And what that looks like in Profit First is we're going to use that through, I'm going to call it physics, the use of bank accounts. Literally, we're going to pay our profit first. We're going to pay our profit bank account first. So what happens in Profit First is all your money is collected in one account, and I'm going to call it a revenue account. And then what happens is twice a month, you're going to transfer that money into designated bank accounts. So kind of like budgeting by bank accounts. And so you're funding your profit account first. So you're profitable day one. Nobody should be running at a loss on profit first. Then you're funding your owner's pay because yes, you're your MVP, you're your most valued player and you need a paycheck. You need a paycheck. And so especially if you're building a business that you might want to sell one day, nobody wants to buy a business that's not sellable, that doesn't have pay and compensation for the work that you're doing. Then we're going to fund your tax account because you got profit, you got owner's pay. I can be as good as a tax accountant as we need to be, but you're going to have a tax obligation. And so we're going to go ahead and reserve for taxes, even though we hopefully won't use all that money. We're going to reserve for taxes versus wondering how we're going to pay last year's taxes with this year's money. And then that last bank account that we're going to have is going to be our operating expense account. And that's where we're going to pay our bills out. And so what happens in Profit First is we start to use our natural human tendency, something called Parkinson's law. And what Parkinson's law says is the more of something, the more I'm going to use of it, right? Dr. Robin, I'm looking at your Post-its. You got a lot of Post-its. You probably have a lot of inventory of Post-its. And the more Post-its you have, the more you're going to use. The less Post-its you have, the less you're going to use. You're going to start to put major concepts, a few concepts onto a Post-it is what's going to happen. And try to preserve that Post-it because you don't want to run out to Sam's Club to buy more Post-its, right? And so therefore you're going to use less. And that's just how it is. The more we have of something, the less we're going to use. And so by creating that operating expense account, we're creating an illusion of scarcity, meaning that the less that's available, the less we're going to spend. And so when it comes to okay, do I have money to hire that new VA or executive assistant? My OpEx account, my operating expense account is kind of low, right? And so I may not make that decision. Do I need to get a office lease, right, to meet my clients? Maybe virtual sounds a lot better now, right? And again, it's based upon what's in my account versus having that whole pool of money go in there and I'm just spending it because, it's just there. We're creating that illusion of scarcity and we're forcing ourselves to pay ourselves first. So that's the profit first system. It's a cash management system. It's not an accounting system. I have so many people come up to me and go, Susanne, I love that accounting system. And I'll tell you, it makes our hair stand out. Okay. It's a cash management system designed to create profitability, intentional profitability.
Okay. All right. So I'm guessing someone might be asking, or maybe it's just me. All right. So you said that, I'll put it in my words. It's annoying to call it accounting system versus cash management. What's the difference? What's the distinction you're making?
So that accounting system, you're not gonna be able to fire your accountant or your bookkeeper. You still need those financial statements because we still need to go through and go, what do we need to optimize? What can we cut? What makes sense from that standpoint? But literally, it's a system that can run practically without financial statements, right? Because it's bank balance accounting. It's, do I have money in this bank account? And if I do, I can spend. And if I don't, probably let's wait for another day. And maybe I might not even want it tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I get it. I get it. That makes sense to me. All right, so that was the profit first kind of family, the umbrella thinking about how to manage your cash, right, as an entrepreneur. All right, so now tell
Exactly.
us the difference between your work and how it fits relative to the whole profit first family.
So my work and my book, and I work with minorities and non-minorities, as one of the things that I noticed was there was a difference in minority people of color client, and I don't even like using the word minority anymore. Fact is, we're people of majority, and it's time that we take our position. Is really what it is. But people of color, for example, we come from different educational backgrounds, right? We're not necessarily, I was lucky to be a second generation business owner, but most of us aren't. And so we don't know what we don't know. And I'll tell you, even working for my dad, I got a heads up. I got to look at his clients and look at what are they doing and what could they be doing differently. I got to get his advice on things like, oh, like things that are not taught in school, tax strategy, for example, when you get up into that creative, like what type of legal entity do I really need to be? Maybe a C corp, especially if you're high net worth, might actually be better if you're trying to shelter income. And so you're learning, and it's things that are not taught in school, and it's a different level of strategy. And what the reason why I wrote that book was I wanted to equalize that strategic playing field. And so I wanted to provide that tax advice. I wanted to provide that government contractor. I think a lot of times when people, we get certified as an MBE or WBE, one of the first things that people do is they go, "Oh, you got to apply for this government contract." And government contracts can be great, right? But the problem with government contracts is it's a process called RFP, request for proposal, right? You're not the only one bidding. You've got 5 other Dr. Robins bidding too for that same proposal. And what does that mean? It's a race towards bottom. It's which Dr. Robin can get it to the lowest, right? And so who really wins when you're competing against price, right? And so it's looking at like, how do you know if a contract is good? When do you walk away from that contract, right? And at the end of the day, when you evaluate all your costs and you look at your profitability, what you want it to be based upon what we call target allocation percentages. And Dr. I'll give you a link for your viewers to click on to see what a healthy company looks like so they can kind of figure out what their percentages are, or what it can be striving to be as they implement this process.
Great.
But, does it bidding at this contract, yes, you might win, but is it going to provide you with not just your owner's pay, right? Because it's going to take a lot of your resources to put this together, but is it going to provide you with the profitability too that you need for your business?
Yes, yes. And so I'm guessing or I'm hearing in here maybe the people of color approach is a little bit different. Maybe you use a different approach with the same principles, or is it a different language? You know what I'm saying?
I'm going to put it this way.
Okay.
When you tell most of us that, oh my gosh, you're going to be $1 million company, you know, our eyeballs light up, $1 million in revenue, but we don't know that $1 million company could actually equal a $50,000 loss. And so because we didn't grow up a lot and we didn't grow up with the knowledge of how to create those bottom lines, sometimes we bid on, I've seen $50 million contracts run at $1 million loss in a minority business.
Yes, yes. Okay. All right. I can clearly hear your passion for this work. And I sounds like it started at a very young age. All right. So now let's think about your author self. And as we were talking earlier before we started recording, I'm looking to support authors, high achieving women who are responsible, good at lots of things, doing lots of things, and they wrote a book. Sometimes they don't even refer to themselves as authors or don't see themselves as authors. But however they see themselves, that's who we're talking to now. And so I'm going to ask you about that part of you. All right. So in this process of becoming and or being, you have some accolades related to yourself and in this book. What would you say has been your greatest joy in this, I'll call it book world? That I'm trying to avoid calling you an author. In the book world, what has been your greatest joy?
There have been so many great things that just have made my heart just, flutter. That's just the best way to put it. Whether it be an email from a reader that says, "Oh my gosh, you just changed my life. You're telling me stuff that I've never heard of before, and you're giving it so generously." And or I'm not alone, because a lot of times us high achieving women, we don't share the story. All you see is the glory at the end. We just see Oprah, and her big house and her lovely English garden. We don't see what her day to day is and what she really has to go to, because I'm sure Oprah has had to fire some people,
I'm sure.
and that probably wasn't easy doing that. And so, just to get that, okay, what I'm going through is normal. This is part of the passage to get where I'm going. Or even finances, to learn another way of doing things has been incredible. But I think the biggest joy for me was, one of the things that I did, because when I wrote a book, and when you're writing your book, at some point you realize that you don't get a whole lot for your book. Okay. It's not going to be something that's going to make you really wealthy. It's really, at the end of the day, when you're putting your work out in the world as an author, most of us, it's creating change, right? It's creating, for me, it was equity. It was creating, equality and finances for underprivileged backgrounds. That was my goal with that. It was up leveling communities. And I think that the biggest joy that I got was when I realized that I wasn't going to make a lot of money. I mean, if you're lucky, you might make $5 a book if you're lucky. What I did was I said, since I'm not making anything anyway, I could really use some tax deductions. And I was like, what I'm going to do is, for every book that I sell, I'm going to give $1 to Hope Worldwide in order for them to send girls in Zimbabwe to school. Because just like your mother, Dr. Robin, right? She didn't get to go to school. Your brothers did, right? Or your uncles did, because, the men carried a name, right? They carried a legacy. Women get married. And in some cultures, like my dad is Chinese, my mom is African American, the women become property and once they get married. And so what I wanted to do in Zimbabwe was I wanted to send girls to school, because if you go to school in Zimbabwe, most likely if you get to college, your government's going to sponsor your college education, but it's the primary education that's hard to get, because your parents may not have money, and if they do, they're going to send your brother to school. And that means a lot in Zimbabwe, because first of all, if I graduate and I become a doctor, that means that I don't have to be the second wife or third wife to somebody. Okay. That means that I don't have to contract a sexually transmitted disease, because my husband is just who he is. Right. And so, I was proud about is that first year that we filled up an entire classroom of girls. I mean, it was like 40 girls going to school based upon book sales. And then the second year we sent those same girls to school based upon book sales. And so just really getting creative of, how do I create something in the world that's going to empower people, but at the same time, continuing a ripple effect of continuing to empower.
Yeah,
And so that's probably what I'm most proud of in this journey.
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I'm sure that's inspiring to lots of women who are listening now. All right. So now we're talking about the book and getting it out into the world. You mentioned, you don't make much money off of a book in and of itself. Let's start with the challenge. What would you say is one of the greatest challenges either you experienced or that you know of others who have written books and getting their book out? What's a marketing challenge?
I think one of the biggest challenges when you first embark upon it is you don't know what you don't know. You don't know. I mean, everyone thinks that and I thought it, you write a book, then everybody's just going to buy your book. It's a book on finances, and it's talking about minorities, and it's talking about government. Who wouldn't buy this book? But the reality is there are zillions of books on Amazon. Okay. Zillions. And, it's realizing that, you have to really bring your book, not just write it, but it's a business too. You have to market your book. You have to talk about your book. And I almost hate to say this, like, if you're a little bit like, I'm an introvert, I'm a tax accountant by background. Okay. I like feel relief when I'm like cranking tax returns and I'm using like a 10 key, like I feel at peace. The world is good, getting on social media, talking, or going up on stage, I'd rather not. Okay. That's just a little secret. And a lot of us that are writing nonfiction, right? We love what we do. It's not necessarily the speaking on stage. It's not necessarily the social media or the following. And it was realizing that, okay, if I don't talk about this book, if I don't tell people about this book, if I don't show how my book has changed lives or even my work, right? Because at the time that I wrote the book didn't exist. I had to show my clients, and I share their stories too in the book. I interview them live and I share their stories. And what I did that was different in our book was I didn't focus on statistics. Dr. Robin, you know what a statistics is for a woman of color in business. Instead, what I did was I focused on the outliers. I focused on the women that were killing it, that were 7-figure companies that were bringing in $500,000, women that were buying farms, women that were buying buildings, women that were sending their kids to college because of the money they made from their business because they had implemented profit first. And really, it was about telling their stories and studying what they did differently, being a woman of color and still getting results that make like the SBA statistics go, what? Those outliers that nobody wants to talk about, right? That's what we focused out in the book. And so really just, because when you don't have that book, you have to show your work. You have to show why are you effective, right? And your people are going to talk about the ones that you've helped already. And so you got to get out there, you're going to be talking about your examples. I remember we had our book launch. It was like the last 30 days and we were just dropping it, like interview 10, interview 9. And every day there was a new interview that just made, and it was just like, not just interview, but people who had 7-figure companies that were crazy killing it, just to really show that this book works, this technique works. Because it wasn't about a book, it was about the technique. And the book just told you about how it works. And so really talking about it, even when it's not comfortable, even when it's not your jam or your thing to do, even when it feels like bragging, because that's how you're going to get your message out in the world.
Yes, yes. And I mean, for a person who thinks about purpose and message, to me is connected to that, it's like yours. It sounds like it's very connected to your mission and your message are intertwined. Yeah. So now were you helping, it sounds like it, because you had case studies before you even wrote the book. You were working already with people of color, helping them with these strategies.
I had been in business for 15 years. I had been a CPA for over 20 at the point that I wrote that book. And so really it was about taking that knowledge, that superpower, I would call it, and packaging it into 200 pages.
Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. All right. So that was a gold nugget. But now, all right, let's one more. So for the author who's listening or the woman who's written a book, whether she calls herself an author or not, what's some advice, a tip, or some words of wisdom you'd give to her in her journey of entrepreneur, person who's written a book, and a woman who's doing all the things?
So I think the biggest thing would be, and I would tell this to anyone that's, starting off on a venture or even in the middle if you haven't done it, because I'll tell you, when I started my business 15 years ago, I didn't think about this probably till year 5, and it made the biggest difference for me. And it goes back to Simon Sinek. Everybody knows Simon Sinek, and he says, start with why. And you have to really know why you're doing it, and not just why, but what does winning look like for you? What does, at the end of the day, what will make you go home and feel like today was a good day on that deathbed when you're about to die, when your kids are crying and they're like, Mom, I'm not ready to go. What is going to make you say, don't worry, honey, I had a good life? And really understanding what that is, because that's going to set your path onto what direction you're going to go and also your strategy to get there.
Yes, yes. And that's something I resonate with. Yes. And so, as you know, the podcast is Leadership Purpose. And we were talking earlier, and I was talking about how purpose and meaning is one of my favorite topics, and from my mother's story and the whole thing. So in your own life and work, do you think having purpose is important?
Definitely. Definitely. I remember when I was in college, I had this job at the library, and it was Ohio State Library. It was a student job, and I was doing the bookends. I don't know, Dr. Robin, if you know what bookends are, but
Yes,
you remember that Dewey Decimal System?
I do.
Well, yeah, she's a Dr. Robin, so she
And
knows.
I love the library. I still love the library today, even with all this online. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, my job was to create the bookends, like literally type up the Dewey Decimal System and get them adhered to the back of the book. And I remember sitting there doing this Dewey Decimal System on the book, and it probably was like week 2 in this job. And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like my brain cells are dying every single day. And I remember like when I told the library, I said, I need to leave. I mean, I'll put in my 2 weeks, but I can't do this job because it's making me depressed, literally, because I'm looking out this window every single day. It's dark outside and I'm doing bookends and I just want to go outside. And, the job that I took after that was in a computer lab at Ohio State University. So I was like learning like how to do systems. I was learning higher end, like Microsoft, helping my fellow students in the lab, that type of thing. And it was so much more fulfilling because I could see where I was going to go and how I might use that in my career after I graduated. And again, it's about, and even if you don't know your purpose, because our purpose changes throughout life and we don't know, but at the end of the day, it has to light you up and you have to be interested in it. So that is so important with that.
Yeah.
Don't get stuck doing bookends if that's not your passion.
And you had the wisdom to leave. Yeah. Yeah. And so I really appreciate all that you said, especially as one who appreciates purpose. All right. So you've been so generous with your time and your wisdom. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that maybe you want to share with people? And if not, it's okay. But I want to give you an opportunity. It's something that you just on your mind or spark something that came along the way that you'd like to share before you tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Well, this has been amazing time, amazing conversation, Dr. Robin, that we've had together. And I've had so much fun and I've so enjoyed it. I would say, as an aspiring author, which most of you guys are, or you're writing a book or you've already written a book, just when you write the book, it doesn't end. That's just the beginning. You still have to talk about the book. You still have, your book should live. Your book should have a life. Keep talking about the book. Keep bringing it up. Keep telling the world about your book, because there are millions of people in this world that have not heard about your book. And so don't stop, because the moment you stop talking about your book, that legacy dies.
Well, we couldn't end any better than that. All right. So I'm sure people are saying, how can I hear more? What can we do? So Susanne, tell them how they can be in touch with you.
So the best way to contact me is I am going to send Dr. Robin the sheet for the target allocation percentage transfer, and if you go ahead and sign up for that, you'll get that, what a good company looks like in terms of profit, in terms of owner's pay, and I'll help you on your journey for starting to set up a successful company on profit first. But it'll also connect you with me. So it'll connect you with me, and you'll be able to reach out if you have any questions.
Okay, we'll be sure to have that link in the show notes. All right, thank you so much, Susanne, for sharing this afternoon. I know it's sort of the end of your day, and you dropped so many gems and wisdom. So appreciate you for being here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.
And everyone, if you want to reach me, you can reach me. I'm hanging out on social media everywhere, but particularly at LinkedIn at Robin L. Owens, PhD, at Robin L. Owens, PhD. And I'm spending the summer figuring out how to help women who've written books expand their message beyond the book. And one way I do that is helping women turn their books into what I call masterful courses. So if you've been thinking about it, maybe I want to turn my book into a course, go head over to createmasterfulcourses.com. createmasterfulcourses.com, and you'll see my free video series there to help you get started. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. If you enjoyed it, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. New episodes drop every week, and I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. Meanwhile, this is Dr. Robin signing off. See you next time.